What's up, everybody? My name is Luke Garrity. I am a pastor theologian in Northern California at a Vineyard Church, and on today's Theo Vlog, I'm going to talk about the subject of ministry time. In other words, how do we create space for the work of the Holy Spirit? How do we create a culture that's receptive to the activity of the Holy Spirit in our local churches? How do we be charismatic and be sensitive to the variety of people that come through the doors of our church, including unchurched people or people who have had maybe zero experience in charismatic churches? That's going to be the subject of this Theo Vlog. So ministry time is a term that's used in a lot of charismatic or Pentecostal churches, and it basically describes the time where churches will have a space for people to receive prayer, prophetic words, to receive prayer for healing. It's basically a space of the church where we actually say, "Come, Holy Spirit, we need your presence, we need your power, we want your activity right now." It's definitely a term that you find in a lot of charismatic churches. So the question is, what's the best way to carry out ministry time in the local church? So here's some guidelines that I kind of follow in our local church. First, I definitely want to have a long-term, sustainable culture within the church that I'm pastoring so that there's always a value for the work of the Holy Spirit and the person of the Holy Spirit. We want to have the presence of the Spirit with us. And the reality is that in the local church, in my experience, if we keep doing certain things that are very important, but if we do them always the same way in the same spot, sometimes people lose interest, unfortunately. Plus, I want people in our local church gatherings to see every space of the local church's worship gathering as being space for the presence and power of the Holy Spirit. So in our church, we try to move ministry time around in different ways. We actually have it sometimes during the music time. We might have it at the end of music time. We might do it, before the sermon. We might do it in the middle of the sermon, and we might do it at the end of the sermon. I'd also like to remind you that in 1 Corinthians chapters 12, 13, and 14, the Apostle Paul addresses the subject of spiritual gifts. He talks about what they should look like and how they should be exercised. But before he talks about that, in chapter 11, he talks about the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, or what many of us call communion. And I think it's important to recognize that around the Lord's table, we also could have a powerful encounter with the Holy Spirit, and we could also see some really great ministry time too. So I'd encourage you to think about all of these different spaces as spaces for the presence and power of the Holy Spirit to happen. Now, if you've been in a charismatic church before, you probably realize that most of the time, ministry time happens generally at the end of the service after the sermon. It seems like that's a really common way, and I definitely think that it's probably one of the more effective ways to get people to respond to what God may be doing at that time. But I definitely think that if you keep doing it that way all the time, you might lose people's interest, and you get into this routine where you actually don't follow the spontaneous leading of the Holy Spirit. So what if we approach our worship gatherings with this question? How might the Holy Spirit want to move today? And where might the Holy Spirit be moving in our gathering? If we have questions like that in the back of our mind, we might actually respond to those leadings and those outpourings of the Spirit at any space in the church gathering. Another thing that we do is that sometimes we'll have people come forward to receive prayer from people in our church that have been trained or people who are part of our leadership team. And sometimes we actually just have people stand where they are to respond. Other times we actually might have people raise their hand or stand, and then we'll actually try to get everybody in the church involved in praying for people. I guess my point is that I think we need to have a little bit more imagination and be a little bit more creative in the way that we see ministry time. Because again, it's about the spontaneous outpouring and working and gifting of the Holy Spirit, right? And if it is like that, then we should recognize that the Spirit can do whatever the Spirit wants to do, whenever the Spirit wants to do things. After all, we want to get people to pray for people before the service and after the service. Plus, I think it's really a challenge if people only see ministry time happening at one specific time during the service. They might not be able to imagine doing the stuff or carrying out kingdom ministry Monday through Saturday in their normal lives. You know, many years ago, John Wimber said that the meat is in the streets. And I believe with all of my heart that the church has been called to continue the ministry of Jesus by carrying the ministry of Jesus out into the world around us. And so that's one of the reasons why in our context, we see ministry time as a space where the Holy Spirit is able to engage our hearts. It's a space that we want to create, cultivate. It's a desire that we want people in our local church to have for the presence and power of the Spirit, the inbreaking of the kingdom. And in order to do that, I think we have to actually enlarge our vision a little bit and conceptualize that ministry time can happen any time that we gather together, any time that we long and hunger for the presence and power of the Spirit, any time we say yes and we take the risk of obeying the leading that we feel in our hearts. And with that, in order to do what I'd probably consider a shameless plug, I'd like to recommend this book for you. My friend Mike Turgiano and I put this book together. Mike Turgiano wrote most of the chapters. I wrote one of the chapters and did some questions for each of the chapters. But I'd love to encourage you to check out this book. If you're curious about how to do ministry time, you're curious about how to do Holy Spirit ministry, and you're a normal human being, this would be a great book to pick up. I'll probably talk more about this book in an upcoming vlog, but for right now, that's how I conceptualize the concept of ministry time. Hey, I would love for you to reach down and to hit that subscribe button. You can also find me on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram, and also check out my website. All the links are in the descriptions below, as well as a link to this book that I just recommended. Thanks a lot.